Okay. All right. Yeah, there's audios now being recorded. So I'm gonna try to record this session and then post it. Hopefully, I can post it on YouTube later, so that everyone are able to come. Yeah, I know that I said this on Pacific Standard Time. That's just more convenient for me because I'm on this side of the country and also Western Hemisphere. So I know that if you're in Europe or Asia, this was probably not not doable from a scheduling standpoint. So hopefully the recording makes it a lot easier, and hopefully we can get more people from those parts of the world. So just checking now. So like yeah, the mic is working. So like audio should be recorded with this video. It might not have been in the prior like 3 minutes. So I apologize for that if there was no audio. Okay, and so this second I'll be talking about this one's really just talking about and really another way of conceptualizing digital identity, and it's got some interesting feedback, especially because of the this term that arises in the paper called soul-bound tokens and souls. Everyone's like, wait, what are you saying, souls? So that's got some interesting feedback on it, and so I'll kind of just go over the abstract before we're on to talk about just cultural practices. And so I think this session probably will just we'll probably go about an hour to an hour and a half. Yeah, it should really should not take that long. So it's just going to be my findings and thoughts. But I thought this way we can just run through the paper together, and also run through the other done together. So this way, it's not just me talking about the papers. Like, oh, well, here's a specific section I want to talk about. So this way, it's just easier to follow. Once again, this is trying paper from that's cool as well. So I kind of did this like kind of so uh, don't know that's really a lot of planning. So hopefully next session, which will I'll kind of plan to like have these anti-book club sessions around the second Sunday of each month. Hopefully that's a good timing for everyone. So yeah, so tools or thoughts as cultural practices, not computational objects. All right, and so the audience. So I just kind of assume that you already know about tools or thought. Know what it is before I get into it. And so as you can see here are my highlights. So this way I don't have to find where I left my notes before. Hopefully help save some time. So, first and foremost, like tools that this nice little rallying cry, and all these people work on different things together. So, personal knowledge management, computer support, collaborative work, knowledge graphs, or human computer interaction. Like everyone's coming around, rallying around this term. So it's really, well, it's kind of this meme that just everyone's gravitating towards. And as you can see, tools for that, it's really kind of blown up in software. Found lots of people are trying to invest in it. So this big new category. And so of course it's like there are she provides some new companies trying to put stuff out. And it's like, oh, okay, so we have these interesting tools, but like again, but as mentioned, it's like, what does this actually even have to do with well, thought? And it's like, okay, we have all these apps, keep saying tools for that, but it's like, are these apps, are they themselves tools for that, or just like, examples of tools you can use to, expand your mind in the ways you think. And then going with things is, just here's like, you know, trace tool, for that, doesn't mention computer or digital anywhere. So it's like sure, we have these computational tools, I guess like digital, but it's like what does it actually have to do with it, with the tool for that? This the term itself doesn't say anything about digital, and that's one of the interesting things about tool for that is that it doesn't have to be digital, it can be digital or non-digital, but it's really just anything that helps you expand your mind or the mediums and what you can think. And so from there, we pass that and right, so what is a tool for that? Some really nice definitions. Andy, Andy Matushak, and Michael Nielsen, Douglas Allen, Alan Kay. So a lot of different things. Based on their definition, counts as a tool for that. And, it doesn't have to explicitly be digital. And so I really like Megan Strickler's example here, for written language, because that's really is like the greatest, or at least one of the greatest tools for that we have is, written language, be able to, communicate our thoughts. So, that's an interesting thing. That's like, oh, that's a tool for that. But it's like, once again, it's not necessarily digital, but you can have digital. You can write, with a computer, but you could also just write with pen and paper. Once again, it's not really about whether it's what you're writing, on the computer or writing on pen and paper. It's really the ability just to write. And once again, that would really be more of the medium, rather than necessarily the actual method or the tool. Because writing is like, oh, here's the tool, but it's like you can put the tool in multiple mediums, and it can give you the same or more. I don't want to say expansion, but just get more ways of getting stuff out you're writing. It's like in digital space, it's like, oh, I can connect this to all these other stuff. So like I connect to like Wikipedia, and then like, oh, I can find information, and this helps me as I write this. And I can also connect my my writing app to like it's like a calendar app, so like I can know when like I should be writing and keep track of things. Also like spell checker, you have all these like extra tools which come in which help you write, compared whether you just use like pen and paper. So it's like it's not necessarily that you can use pen and paper. I think the big difference is that you can augment additionally through computational tools, and that's something that gets into a little bit later. Paper, like drawing, maps, and Arabic numerals. This was also Andy Matushak and Michael Nielsen's paper about transformative tools for thought. That's one of the biggest ones right here. There's a lot of different tools for back method. So scientific method is always a tool for that. One of the things I was thinking about through when I was reading this also is like, oh, what about like systems thinking? Like I think systems thinking or even design thinking itself could also be technically a tool for that. That does help you think certain ways and helps run through things. And I think a lot of these tools, which are really interesting, that it really helps just kind of like navigate thought space. Like it can help you navigate thought space. That's like, to me, always would be like a tool for that. Helping navigate thoughts would be a tool for that. Of course, that's stochastics, that's big. Spreadsheets, data visualization, like a lot of things which you might not necessarily think of first and foremost. Like, oh, that's a tool for that. But it's like, oh, no, actually, that's a tool for that. That's just for the kind of thoughts we can have, and there are ways of thinking. And we can expand the thinking tool with that and help. Maybe expand our thinking, solve problems in different ways, or solve problems that we couldn't solve before. And so, as suggestions here, it's like look at scientific methods, Socratic method. Those are more techniques. They're not necessarily tools. And then drawing, writing, or mediums or representations, but are they like tools? So that leads to us coming over here. This, it's like tools, cultural practices, mediums, objects, and so these are all things which are tools. And so with the tools, I actually really like the presentation. And so, um, so this, our choice is really on the cultural practices side of things. So cultural practice, culture's just way of doing things. It's kind of like, for example, so it's just like a handshake. Like, how do I, you know, how do you do a handshake? And depending on your culture, that might be different. Like, how do you introduce yourself to someone? Changes depending on what culture you have, and that's just a way of introducing yourself. So that's sounds the thing about just with culture bias. It's just ways of doing things. So, for example, you could compare it like, sorry, not compare, but an example to think about, at least comparison, would be like, so for example, in the East, like using chopsticks, compared with here in the West, where we use cutlery. So that would be, I think, a pretty good example of cultural practice. Like, either way, you're gonna eat food, but it's how you go about, eating your food. So, just kind of like an example there. That was kind of a long run there. I was trying to figure, put put my thoughts together. So sorry about that. And from there, it's this little part where she talks about the computational roots for tools for that. They really come from the 1980s. So it's kind of Sierra's Park. I got Alan K. Douglas Engelbert, Brett Victor, Howard Rheingold, and they're all about computational mediums as tools for that, and really it's a computer as a meta medium. So it's a medium for making mediums. So this way you can make even more mediums that could help your dot than you could necessarily before. So an example there would be like simulations. Like you can't really simulate things outside the computer. And so simulations is also like an example of a tool for that, and also showing like how the computational medium really acts as a meta medium. But with the computer, you can make the simulation. Simulation is the medium, while the computer is the meta medium, which allowed the, you to create the medium, which was the simulation. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. I probably was. And so on the computational side, Howard Rheingold, I use computers to expand the mind. Of course, Matushak and Michael Nielsen's essential tools for that. And stuff, but let's see, yeah. And then of course some exploring system for the readings, and then find people who are interested in tools for that and just hear them. Have a speaker present on a topic on guard tools for that, usually like their own tool. It's really cool and interesting. I really recommend taking a look at tools without rocks if you're interested in this kind of stuff. And there's just she went a little bit more in depth in this notes, and I might put it like as a link later. But she went over pretty much the same stuff. But I just felt like how she was mentioning, just like, oh, this is these are tools for that, and it's like it's not just computational, and just the computational side is just another expansion of just the ways you can develop tools with that, rather than the tools for that itself. And she made a really interesting point. So, if we go back up here to like all these tools, it's like Rome, you got Obsidian, Cosmic. It's like, do these tools themselves actually make us think better? And the answer is probably no. But they do allow us to plug off system tools for that. So, so this we can manage information. And it's like, okay, with Rome or Obsidian, I can put in a Zell custom, and digital, there's a digital now which conforms to a Zell custom. It makes it easy to make one and manage it, right? So that's like a great part about Rome. I'm saying so you can put this tool or that custom into it, But of course, running the site by themselves don't once make you think better. But if you have an information system yourself that you want to use, or then it makes a lot more sense, and especially much more useful. You have to have your own system that you want to plug in to one of those tools. And so, like, you can also have your own note-taking method, or techniques that could be like Cornell notes method. And then, there's also RAM notes, and like Cornell lets you put in flashcards right away. So, like, if you want to just like get space rotation systems, like you can also plug those into these kind of tools. But it's like you don't necessarily need computational medium to do like space repetition, because you can just write index cards and as yourself, like I think everyone's done that, but it's just like it just makes it easier. And that's really the big thing with a lot of these tools. Like, they're not necessarily making us, I would say, think better yet. Excuse me. We haven't really gotten there. I would say really it's just that, we can actually plug in our existing tools for that into them in a way that makes it easier to manage them. So I think that's a really cool thing that Maggie mentioned in her tools for that session. Is that, that's, the tools themselves aren't really doing things, but we can put in our existing tools for that in these new digital tools, and boom, now they're super useful. So I just thought that was a really interesting point that she made, and kind of comes from this. And I'm not sure if anyone watching part of the video, but very cool stuff. I really like that. Everything's just coming under this term, and so since everything's coming under this term, you'll see a lot of different things called tools for that, and that's like a really good thing. And down here, it's like here, objects. Like, lots of things fall under tools for that. So not necessarily everything's going to be a tool. It'll just be cultural practice. Some of these cultural practices. The I think I'll say like poetry. Like, this would be a cultural practice. Transferring information through poetry, found out, and that can be a practice right there. And so it kind of goes together. It's like cultural practice also influence what tools that we even get. Because of course, like, what tools are even acceptable in society depends on the culture. So depending on what your culture is, you might not necessarily accept certain tools. So you might not necessarily get every tool for that in your culture. Your culture might not necessarily want that tool. So that's something else. I'm not sure if I can go into it, but that's something else to also think about. It's just that how this culture constrain our thinking, and also our ability to develop tools for that, which can expand our thinking. So that'd be an interesting thing to talk about some point in the future. So that's on practice on computational objects by Megan Ableton. You can also find the link here. Hopefully, hopefully, a little diatribe on it. So now I'll move over to just Centralized Society, Finding Web3 Soul. Probably won't go into this one too much, just because it's a long paper. You have some notes on this one. It's popping. It's been hot. If you get the chance. I was also trying to do this with class, but it doesn't really work very well on PDFs just yet. Alright, so the Centralized Society, Finding Web3 Soul. So here we'll just go click. So Web3 today centers around expressing transferable financialized assets rather than encoding social relationships with trust. Its many core economic activities, such as uncollateralized lending and building personal brands, are built on persistent, non-transferable relationships. In this paper, we illustrate how non-transferable soul-bound tokens (SBTs), representing the commitments, credentials, and affiliations of souls, can encode the trust networks of the real economy to establish provenance and reputation. More importantly, SBTs enable other applications of increasing ambition, such as community wealth recovery, civil assistant governance, mechanisms for decentralization, and novel markets with decomposable shared rights. We call this richer pluralistic ecosystem decentralized society, DSOC, a co-determined sociality where souls and communities come together bottom up as emergent properties of each other to co-create plural network goods and intelligences at a range of scales, such as quadratic funding, discount-based correlation scores that reward trust and cooperation while protecting networks from capture, extraction, and domination. As such, augmented sociality of the to today's hyper-financialization in favor of a more transformative, pluralist future of increasing returns across businesses. Alright, and that's big. Like overall, I thought it was really interesting. There are some stuff in there where it's like, you know, makes you really question uh, the authors because they're like, oh, we want to make something that's a little better for Web3, but it's like it sounds like you're just trying to make like another dystopia, but it's our dystopia. That's kind of one of the thoughts I got from reading this one was really that, and so I'm not sure if I'll go through like page by page, but I'll probably just pick out some of the highlights that I thought. Well, actually, I'll probably just get my thoughts first and foremost, and then go through some of the highlights. I mean, with Maggie's paper, post, it's just like a lot shorter, so I could just like go through page by page, but it's like 37 pages, so like that might take forever. I'll probably just give just my thoughts first and pick out some highlights as I go along. Hopefully, this makes some sense and it's helpful. All right. So we got the introduction. Yada yada. First, like what was the problem? Current Web 3 doesn't allow for composable systems, especially ones which rely on persistent identities, and that gets mentioned in the abstracts. So that's gets here. Provide more composability, especially social identities. So identities based on relation rather than individuals. So it's kind of like how do you avoid? Well, they're trying to like do more like intersectional social identity rather than just self-sovereign identity, but they kind of mess up later in the paper. Like okay, so tokens. It's really just non-transferable tokens, which are public but they're on-chain, and they represent commitments, credentials, and affiliations. So they can really kind of represent anything, and they're centered around wallets, which is a little strange. But since that's the primary way to interact with blockchain, so yeah, wallets here describe what's a soul. Like I didn't really get why they call this a soul when it's just a wallet. We already have like a term for this. It's like now they're just remaking terms, and it doesn't really like help explain it any bit better by calling it a soul than just a wallet. That's just how I felt about it. I felt that they could just avoid of calling it a soul and soul-bound tokens. It feels like you're just adding a lot of language, which is just like unnecessary, especially when we already have existing terms for this stuff. It's like instead of soul, it's like oh we have wallets. It's like you could just say identity, and it's like you already have. I mean, they already have their own like, intersectional social identity, which once again, that's kind of like what this is, but just going like a little bit grander scale. So at least in in my thoughts, like oh you should just go with identity instead of souls because everyone already uses that. It's well established. Like that's what all the issues surrounding this digital identity are about. Is like identity. So using souls is like I just didn't think it was necessary. So going here was the key primitive. You know, wallets that hold publicly visible, not just shareable, but possibly revocable by issue of tokens. So not just shareable, but revocable, and has to be public. So pretty much, you know, uh, so pretty much just works like regular tokens, just that's there's controls on transferability. But things like you technically already have this capability, and they're already like non-transferable tokens. So capability already do it, already been done, and called accounts of soul, held by the accounts of tokens. Once again, I really don't like the term. And so, they want to be public. This one's going to on chain, but they need to mention some privacy things. But still kind of defeats. Uh, I'll get to it. Okay. SVTs, they can be self-certified. Like I can just say, make my own resume pretty much like on LinkedIn. It's like, oh, it's who I say I am. And then from there, you know, another way as well, so people can issue you soulbound tokens. So this could be like a school or a company. It's like your school gives you a degree, they issue you a degree, boom, got a token. Great. Alright, say, this also entry like to legal names, or there has to be one soul per person. That is actually pretty nice because like later down the road, kind of do talk about that, but it's kind of a little bit of a strange thing about, at least in my mind, about having soulbound tokens as souls. That it kind of does seem that it really should be one per person. Because it feels like, some kind of, of course, souls are just wallets. It's like, oh, of course, a person got multiple wallets, but then it's like, what's really the point of that then? If you really want to, kind of like establish identity, especially based on relations. Of course, we'll have like multiple identities depending on like which groups we're in, but you know, there's like a base level. Everyone they get identified on based on. It's just that certain things get added or removed depending on where you go. But it's like, of course, not necessarily a legal name, but it's like pretty much everyone has a name. And it's like that name, you might use a different name in certain places, but it's like you always have your name. You might have nicknames, but it's like you always have a name. And it's I'll talk about later. And so now we're on section 4. Sorry, it's a DSOC. Art. It's like you can use this for arts. So excuse me. So we got a quick example here. Artists can issue an NFT from their wallets, which is their soul, and then and as you get an example here, more SVTs. The artist's soul carries these areas for buyer to identify that the soul belongs to the artist, thereby confirming the NFT's legitimacy. I'm not 100% sure about that, but that's our example. Uh, it just pretty much, I mean, it does make sense. It's like, well, they hold X tokens, therefore that should be the artist. Uh, that's kind of the inference that we're going for. And they actually made a pretty interesting example about just like a market built on scarce reputation or authenticity, which is very that part that was very interesting. To relate to some other stuff also with digital identity, as creating reputation-based services. And so they mentioned deep fakes, and with blockchain you can trace the social provenance, so you can see like how something got viral, and based on who's which communities, like who's been spreading in this community, and also where the deep fake itself comes from that community, and just like where does it come from. And I thought they made a pretty interesting point, which I liked, was just the fact that present technology does decontextualize a lot of cultural things. But what their goals as we see is like let's recontextualize, let's provide context again. And they want to base it on the relationships people already have, which sounds pretty good. Of course, so everyone's gonna make their relationships public, and like why do you have to make it public? If you necessarily want. So I feel like that kind of leads to like the problems we already have is like the fact you have to make things public, and it's something that I'll probably get into a little bit later. It's like you get credits, uh, you know, a lot of problems with having a traditional financial system because it can lead to people to get uh, be able to access financial services because of their credit scores. And it's like how do you turn someone's credit worthy? Credit history, but like what information goes in credit history, who determines it. A lot of that's outside of only the user's control. And so they're like, all right, instead of that, let's instead put it based on fields relations, and which just counts as like peer-to-peer lending. Is really kind of what they're saying, but kind of like one of the use cases for SBTs is like, hey, we can just do peer-to-peer lending, or as they say, community lending. But of course, that in itself is actually kind of hard. And so that's where SBTs are coming and said, we can do connections, like, base your connection here, I'll give you X loan because, oh, you're connected to this person. Or this person will, attest that you can pay it back. So kind of like a cosigner. So that's kind of one of the big uses they're using, that I think SBTs can be used for. And it's really just doing like peer-to-peer lending, community lending. And that's really interesting one. That was pretty cool. And then in this case as well, they're saying social recovery. It's like, what happens if you lose your, private keys? Of course, that really sucks. And so, you got your small social recovery. And so in their model, is like multi-sigs. It's kind of like you just pick someone or a group of people to, if lose my accounts, go to these people. Kind of like not as like custodians, but yeah, I'm not really too sure how to describe this. They're saying guardians in the paper. So pretty much like, oh, you have guardians, and it's like, but relationships change, people change, and because relationships change, your guardians themselves might, you know, they might not be so friendly later on. And then instead they're like, SDGs, so since SDGs show us the relationship between people across communities, one of the things you can do is that you can just grab a subset of a soul's memberships and just pick, well, draw a subset, pick people from that community, and just make them the guardians, pretty much. So, and one of the things I mentioned was supposed to be like real time, but that's kind of why I thought they were. But I thought that's a pretty interesting use case there. So that, since you can see the connections, you can also have maybe off chain. That's also kind of the other part too. That a lot of people have on chain, off. That's like most relationships are off chain. I don't think a lot of things are going to be. At least most relationships will be on chain. This just doesn't make a lot of sense. Just, I mean, at least like a couple other problems. A little bit later on. So yeah, I read some. I just been tired through the paper, so really, so I get my thoughts. But one of the interesting things, from there, so connect people based on their intersection with social groups, uh, and so one of the things like, all right, so I just group people. I ask them, hey, I want to get my wallet back, or my private key back. These people, they should somewhat know me. But of course, one of the things I don't think really got mentioned is that, it's like, oh, it's just a random subset of people who you can be connected to. The problem, at least to me, is that, just because like I'm a member of a certain group doesn't mean like I should know anyone in that group, or I'm even close to anyone in that group. A lot of groups, and I think a lot of people like a lot of groups, but it doesn't mean I actually like know anyone in the group or trust them anywhere near enough to ever put my security in their hands. I think, you know, most of the time, like who you put security into is really close friends, family, and I'm not too sure like how many of that will be on chain, but it's just that like it's pretty rare that people actually put you know uh, a lot of that kind of trust, especially if something goes wrong, and people who aren't that close to them. And I do like the idea of security being based on sociality, especially being based on your connections to other people, and it really is like bomb up. I really do like that part. And one of the things I mentioned was like, oh, this can deter people stealing other people's um, wallets, or souls, and just trying to sell them, because technically you also transfers, put limits on transfers to other people you're consistent within your network. That's possible too. It's kind of somewhat similar to a multi-sig, but my only real concern is that most people don't place that much trust in other people, and kind of to me it kind of just like forces you to trust people that you probably will not trust in real life, and that's quite problematic. And of course, even if you talk about like, oh, here's this community of people, it's like this community of people might not like you, and like once again, it's like just a random subset. It's like I'm part of this community, but then again, like not necessarily everyone's community is gonna like you. And unfortunately, what the subset that you pick is people who just do not like you. Like you might just get that lucky. That could happen. And then another thing that could, I was saying before, it's like generally people pick really close, trusting people. It's like very much like close friends and family. Like those are the only people you would ever really kind of give this kind of permission to. And things that you just go based on your social network, that kind of becomes a little problematic, because it goes beyond your close friends, close family, and that's just something that I was thinking about. Like the idea of it. I'm just not too sure, whether people are willing to put that much trust in their own security with people who are beyond their close friends and family, or between like a confidant. For example, it's like, oh, like I made a trust, and like, oh, here's my attorney, like he's supposed to handle trust, like something like that. Once again, like a fiduciary, some type of like really close relationship. Those are only ones where I think it would like at least make sense for most people. Like I wouldn't like let other people have that much control over whether they can re-access their wallets. One things that kind of to me as I was reading this. And so another thing they mentioned, another use case is like instead of airdrops, you get soul drops. So look through your connections. It's like, all right, I'm just gonna drop tokens on these people who are in my connections. Uh, and so there's some problems with airdrops. Stuck with the Matthew effects. It's like here's a metric, people game it. Uh, here's strategic behavior, easily attacked by civils or bots, and that's where like SBTs would really come in. Uh, so soul drops, you just look through, you know, who has which tokens, relationship between tokens and people and holders. Excuse me. And you know, once you look through, it's like okay, so these people hold similar tokens, and it's like all right, based on the relationship between tokens and holders. I think they all do mention like within the correlations by the escalator. And it's like, oh, let me just give tokens to people who already hold tokens related to what I'm working on. So to get the example, like a nonprofit, giving tokens to people who hold environmental action SBTs or guardian SBTs. So purchase anything related to it. It's like, oh, these people, these ones only get the tokens because they're the ones who would actually like care. So instead of just like throwing it around to anybody, um, you know, based on the tokens you already have, we'll give you tokens, which to me is like actually pretty interesting. And that like to me that's like actually kind of a useful uh, use case of really of SBTs. So this way you can like build organically, or not necessarily organically, because you just threw them money. So I wouldn't ever call that organic, but I would call throwing at least throwing the money at people who would probably actually be interested in your stuff. And so this way people don't get stuck with crappy airdrop tokens about communities they don't care about. At least this one would be giving to us to people like who might actually have an interest uh, in your stuff. So to me that makes a lot of sense. That's not actually really interesting use case of SBTs. And so the decentralized organizations, as you can see, this term definition is just all over the place. It's awful. And see, they got their own definition. Everyone's got their own definition. That's why DAOs are great because everyone can define DAO to be whatever they want to be. It's absolutely wonderful. Okay, and they're like, all right, so SBTs, how do they help DAOs? Points. So if you hold certain SBTs, we give you more voting power. That's very interesting. You could use them to help do proof of personhood. So how do we make a symbol tax? That's a really interesting one. So how do we tell who's a bot, who's a person? well, who's a unique soul? Sorry, not a unique person, but who has a unique wallet versus uh, what's a bot? And just giving pretty just voting power to who seems to be a unique person. So a unique soul compared with who's a bot. And then also checking for correlations between holders of SBTs. So that's something that's already kind of done based on just voting behavior, but not necessarily with the tokens people hold. And again, what index it is. But something I like to look into this as well for the DAO index. So I could specifically for the Bonsov index. There's a couple other indices which might be helpful for determining issues to look out for in governance when you're doing org design. I can't remember which one it is, but you do look at like voting patterns and voting blocks, and that's something that's already been done. But I don't think we've had one yet, which just looks like at the tokens people have, and also at their voting relationships. I think that would also be kind of interesting. So it could help you see just like how certain people are influencing more than one community or DAO. With their voting patterns across them. It's like you see a lot of people who hold the same tokens, have a lot of the same voting behavior. It's like, okay, so these guys are all kind of trying to make all these deals do the same thing. And like, also helps kind of just understand like, are they doing this for themselves or are they doing this for a DAO? And also kind of helps understand, are you just doing this the same for themselves for a DAO? Or is everyone just making the same errors across DAOs, or is it just that they all share the same bias, which could be for their own benefit, or they could just have the same ideas. It's also very possible. And so some interesting stuff there. So that's I thought was interesting, just looking for correlations between people's token holdings and also their voting patterns. That's would be interesting. So you talk about correlations for a little bit more, and then another thing we're just realizing was just like talking about a strategic behavior called vampire attacks. I've seen it before, but I never heard anyone call vampire attacks. Just for writing off someone else's work and just copying their open source code, and then trying to lure users with a token. So it's kind of like what happened with SushiSwap and Uniswap. SushiSwap just straight copy pasted Uniswap, and it's like, all right, we got our own new token, which is it sounds horrible, but that's the whole point of open source. It's like can't really complain about people doing things you said they could do, even though it's usually I would say bad taste. But that's one of the things about open source, like we want people to copy. So it's one of those interesting things, and so that's when they talk about with the vampire attacks, like with SBTs, like we can establish a norm of just dropping tokens to accounts with certain tokens or soulbound tokens to accounts we think aren't bots. And so if someone does switch to the new, so for example, we can just use Uniswap and SushiSwap. So Uniswap, let's say, just drops some SBTs down to some people, and then SushiSwap comes along, and then Uniswap checks. It's like, okay, so I dropped SBTs to some of these wallets or souls, and some of these souls are also sharing liquidity with SushiSwap. All right, I'm just going to take their SBTs away from them, just revoke. So that could be a way of trying to prevent vampire attacks. So this way people can do multi-homing. They can be entirely, you just you can be more than one community at one time. The thing I'm not sure that's necessarily a bad thing, or it also kind of feels like lock-in to me, because then you can't just force people to be in one ecosystem. uh, or in one project and not be able to jump into others. So that could actually lead to some interesting problems with something you also see with like just platforms in general. It's just like lock-in. It's like, oh, it's like I want to leave Twitter, but it's like, well, no one else. Like, where else am I gonna go find these people? Or like, I want to leave Facebook, but it's like, well, where else am I gonna find my friends? So I don't think they're really went into that, but could also this I feel also it's like it's an interesting thing to make sure that you can prevent vampire attacks, but also you might have to worry about really creating lock-in with projects, and you don't necessarily want to recreate lock-in problems because that's something that we don't like what to, and we don't want to recreate the problems that we don't like what in Web3. And I thought an interesting one was just like dynamic leadership to me. Uh, with SVTs, so depending on like the actual relationships, intersectionality certain people have, you can raise them to certain positions, which I think is interesting, but also kind of doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense because once again, a lot of people are in a lot of communities. Like there's some people who are just in a lot of DAOs, or so that in itself, like it seems like to me, it would be an interesting thing to do because based on this person's intersectionality across multiple communities, it's like, oh, that's cool, well, within the DAO, which is cool, but also that might just mean they're just really busy. And so it's like, sure, they could, sure, it could make sense for them to take, a leadership role because, like everyone knows them. But also, it could just be that like they're just very busy because they're in so many different roles and groups. So, for example, like if they're in like, let's just say like Bankless, it's like they could be in like multiple guilds, which is possible. But it's like, do you want a person who's in multiple guilds doing stuff to take a leadership role? It's like, you know, sounds good, but like, oh, that's extra work. And this person might just already be, might already have a lot of work on their plate already. It's like you might just be adding more work to them. So that's something that I thought uh, could be problematic about trying to just pick people based on their intersectionality, but also another problem as well is that people just might be in multiple groups. They might not necessarily be doing a lot of things, or they could just be very charismatic and people just like them. So they're in multiple groups because people like them. But then again, that's not necessarily why you pick a leader or a person to take up a management role. You want someone who is likable, but also someone who can help out. And so you don't necessarily just want to pick people just because they're likable and they keep the community cohesive. You don't necessarily just want people for that. So I like the idea. I can also see some problems with that. And so and one of the things I also mentioned as well is like, well, it also needs to help have diversity as well. So this we could identify certain groups within the DAO and just represent them. So like you could do more granular stakeholder representation, which I think would actually be a really cool thing to do with DAOs. So we could have more stakeholder oriented governance. And one of the things also is like, well, SVTs are measure decentralization. I'm not really too sure about this one. So they mentioned Nakamoto coefficient, which is kind of Then of course the Hemphill, sorry, Herfindahl Hirschman index to measure market concentration. So of course there's way more decentralization metrics than those. Like I know I think also look at like the Gini coefficient, just to see just concentration of just like wealth in the economy. I think that's mentioned in the Nakamoto coefficient. But there's a lot of like multiple metrics for decentralization. But of course, the goal is not necessarily the centralization. Uh, but yeah, also I just found even though I think on the community side, there's just like other metrics you could look at. It's one and really just like diversity, especially with groups is like you're looking at leadership management, like how they versus it. I think that might be a little bit better, because then that shows more of the social, the more identity side. With the and the coefficient. And then so one of the things I mentioned is like, all right, so we want to measure centralization, and it's like, all right, so how do we like know, how do we know about decentralization uh, based on social dependencies, and that's kind of where SBTs come in. So it's like, how do you measure, well, it's a pluralism, but really it's just centralization. I don't think we want people confusing decentralization with pluralism, because the two don't actually go together, or at least one doesn't. Decentralization doesn't necessarily lead to pluralism, and pluralism doesn't necessarily lead to decentralization. Okay, and then to give examples, like, all right, so like, how do you measure centralization with SPTs? First of the protocol, let me talk about into SPT rich souls. So you better have all these attestations. Second step, do correlations. Who correlates with who, and then so let's check how people correlate based on their SVTs, but also on other metrics. So you could, so you're saying voting, token ownership, communication, control over computational resources. So that's where you can see the relationships between uh, token holders, which I think is actually like something that should be done. And you do see a lot more. You don't necessarily, we don't necessarily have the identity part yet. I think that's something that SVTs can like help out with. It's just like if we want to turn certain relationships, like adding that social side to investigation of token holdings. And to me, I think that's actually pretty interesting. And this way we can actually kind of pierce the veil a little bit and just see like how's everyone connected, because of course sort of see these wallets, and it's like, all right, hold X amount, but it's like, all right, you might say this wallet's owned by like 5 people, and then all these 5 people all work together. And it's like, oh, we can see it. So I think SVTs this might make it easier to see on chain. But it's like we can find out like now. It's just harder. But with SVTs, it's a bit easier on chain. Like multiple. I just thought that was really interesting. And also, as I mentioned, like they don't really look too deep into it. It's like, how do we uh, figure out how to like actually actually do this, and hopefully it doesn't get manipulated. It's like as we like do, internal relationships. It's really cool. That's one kind of use case, which I thought. Okay, so yeah, like the they're actually pretty uh, like cool between people who own tokens. So this way we can turn relationships. So like just doing network analysis, but with the added features. So uh, network analysis with NFTs kind of goes into decentralization. The decentralization part made a lot of sense because as you mentioned, it's like how what we're actually measuring. Like you wouldn't really know with SBTs, but you can see relationships. So like with that, I think that's cool. So like soul drops, see relationships, and you mentioned property. Like that's really cool because this is like one of the best uses for a blockchain is like microeconomies and especially property rights and the rights that come along with property. So as I mentioned with the apartment lease, it's like technically you can do that on chain right now. It's just hard to do, and it's like with any type of property rights, like you can't really do it on chain because you can't really get the granularity, and that's where like SVTs like I don't necessarily see SVTs giving you that granularity to do stuff with property rights. I do see it helps with some of the identity side, but it doesn't actually help with actually managing the rights. You know, Logic says there right now, it's like they're good for property rights for certain things, but like there's certain things you can't necessarily put on chain. And like I said, once again, trying to put like a license system on the blockchain is really hard, and so it's a hard thing to do. But you can use the blockchain for property rights. It's one of like the best ways of using it, and that's something they said with SV. At least what they're trying to do SV is like instead of having things just be wholly transferable, it's like let's make it partially transferable and the transferability of just certain rights. Of course, property is a bundle of rights. So you have property right, you have a bundle of rights. So they give an example here. So the Roman tradition: use, consume, destroy, profit. That's answer to talk about mostly that's like land. But like if you have like intellectual property, like you got different rights. Uh, so once again, it depends on your property, and that's also kind of like one of the parts where it kind of feels it's a little bit off. It's that it's just like it's just a permanent lease. It's just permanent leases. It's like okay, most people probably you don't really need SBTs to do permanent leases. You can do permanent lease like right now on chain without ever having to deal with an SBT. Because once again, it's not about whether stuff's on chain or not. It's just like you can get all the permissions you need off chain like right now. So like you can do it. You know, uh, get all the stuff you need off chain and then put it on chain. And so that's just one thing I didn't really get about their example of apartment leases because like I don't see how SBTs necessarily makes it more doable because like you would already have to give like your information up in the first place. I know like at least what they're trying to get with is really just like all the attestations about people, their identity is like it's on chain, so that this way it just becomes easier. But of course, if you have multiple souls, like how do I prove that this person actually even owns this soul? And of course, they mentioned later on like using zero knowledge proofs, which I think is actually pretty interesting. But even then, it's still like you still have questions. And like with zero knowledge proofs, it becomes a lot more achievable, at least in my opinion. But just by like But then again, to me, that's zero knowledge proof. Like the zero knowledge proof makes things achievable, not the SBTs. Like you wouldn't even need the SBT to like actually do an apartment lease. And that's just like, my opinion. So I think I'll hit an hour, so I'll just like rush through this because I've just been going on too long. And so, talk about which I it's like a whole chat because what you can do, which is actually a much more interesting one. Excuse me. Uh, and so permissioning access, so transferable entities, which actually does make sense for that. So to my mind, like there are a lot of good stuff like the idea of SVCs. I just think it fails a lot on this like the identity side. It's like it just puts a lot of stuff on chain which probably should not be public. And also a lot of things since like you can have transferable entities, but like, it doesn't have to be you don't have to add the sociality for you to do all this stuff. Like the access transfer SBTs, you don't need them. You can also make a transferable entity without ever having SBT. And you can use an SBT for that, which I think is like an actual interesting use. But at the same time, like you don't need it because you can just collect that, sell it, like with a value. But SBTs might help, people if we're trying to find specific types of groups. As like of course, once again, problem is like these certain things you don't want to put on chain. It's like you want to put your medical information on chain, so it would have to be off chain. And it's like that's where like certain knowledge proofs would come in. But then again, it's like you use SBT for that, but like the SBT just shows your affiliation with the cooperative. It's like okay, that's fine. But then I don't think that really gets to the sociality points that SBTs are really trying to drive. But that's like yeah, a lot of things you can do with. So SBTs kind of expand solves. I didn't really see that. uh, so that kind of goes back to like the correlation scores and stuff, which I think is actually interesting, but I don't think by themselves actually make quadratic voting better. Like I still I like quadratic voting, but I still don't see how it's like necessarily better than other voting systems. That's just my opinion. I think it's more use case. It's like only like two groups are using like quadratic voting, and that's like Bitcoin and like Radical Exchange and like yeah, that's it. Like personally, I like quadratic voting, but I just don't see where it's just like I guess leaps and bounds beyond leaps and bounds better than like other voting systems, at least just yet. But if more evidence comes in, and it's like there's more proof shown, like then I'll go for quadratic voting because I'll go with where the proof goes. But I did like the fact that they didn't mention it, but I just didn't see that's how SBTs themselves actually just make quadratic voting like a better voting system. Like it makes it easier to do the correlation scores, which I think makes quadratic voting at least get closer to its actual goal. But still, I don't necessarily see how makes quadratic voting better in of itself. I'll get into this a little bit later. And so that's like not necessarily I'll go to private, not necessarily I'll go to public. There's some in between. Of course, those are like commons, club goods. Like there's returns for this stuff, but they don't mention it here. Don't know why. Uh, People are fully selfish or fully altruistic. People just play the game. And of course, there are pre-existing groups, pre-existing patterns of cooperation. That's kind of where culture kind of comes in. uh, and so they mentioned some of the problems. It's like you assume people are either cooperative or adversarial, or actually sorry competitive. That's leads to issues, and that's one of the reasons why quadratic funding can't scale. I wouldn't necessarily call it a public funding model. Not, it is a funding model, but I wouldn't call it public. Uh, and so of course, and then they mentioned some of the issues with quadratic funding. Uh, and so as we mentioned, it's like quadratic fund doesn't discount coordination among correlated special interests. That makes some quadratic funding round. That's actually like a problem that Bitcoin had, like, I think one of their first funny rounds with co-drive voting was that, you just have people colluding and people just abusing the system. Uh, and of course getting rewards for it, so that's what you want, and that's where the correlation scores kind of come in. And I thought they had like this really cool quote. It's that make a you really want to make a mechanism that just works with how the world like actually works right now. it's, like, it's, like, it's less getting people to coordinate on goods, but getting people to overcome their differences. And it's like people already are cooperating, but it's like how do we get them to overcome the stuff that prevents cooperation, really, rather than trying to get people to coordinate. It's like people already uh, trying to coordinate. It's just trying to find ways which makes the coordination even better. So I thought that was one. And so the only mentions like, oh, with SVTs, we can see people's affiliations, and so this way we can tell if people are somewhat colluding, or either intentionally or just or unintentionally, and just shows some data. And so they're saying it's like, oh, you can weigh these things differently. It's like consensus between people who are in different groups might, signal something that's good for the broader network rather than something that's just with people who are just similarly affiliated. Though I'm not necessarily too sure about that part. Uh, just saying, because to me at least, it doesn't, you know, I do see the point of looking for that just to prevent collusion, but I don't necessarily see how that means that something's actually a little bit a better signal for plural good, because you can have a group of people who all have similar affiliations who think something's like a plural good and might just be like, oh yeah, it's a plural good. So just saying that in of itself the correlation doesn't necessarily mean that's what people are signaling for is a plural or not. It just means really that people are are correlated, or or at least given signs of collusion. But doesn't necessarily mean that people are one, actually colluding, or two, that they are actually trying to pick good, which wouldn't be for the benefit of the broader network. So that's that was really interesting. I did like this mentions like these things to improve direct coding. As I find to be a pretty interesting modeling, which I find using the financing sense for Polygon. I think it's interesting. I just want to, of course, it's got its problems, and ways you can find to make it better. I think it would be cool. Of course, additionally, if you can find a better method than coDrive, let's go with that rather than sticking with coDrive. These guys said coDrive. Okay, and then you mentioned Pearl network goods. I thought this was kind of interesting, but something that doesn't really make, like, SVCs themselves don't make this possible. But good things to mention. It's like we can develop AI models and prediction markets. But of course, you probably don't want to put a prediction market on chain. that doesn't really work. Uh, Running prediction markets, of course, research that you want. Uh, Sophisticated teams doing prediction polling, which of course makes sense. But it's like having like an outright market or a community that does forecasting itself is actually still probably going to be pretty freaking accurate. So like you don't actually need a team. So like for example, you have like Metaculus, where you just have like community forecasters just being a forecast, and they're usually pretty they're pretty good about it. Of course, not saying that a team itself wouldn't be good. Like a team itself will always be good, but just like I just don't necessarily. There's some research there. It's like community themselves also do farming, making predictions. So I just want to mention it, but also this fact that like with SBTs, it's like, oh, we can form teams to do forecasting, which I thought was also maybe also one of the things I thought was really interesting. It's like, oh, even if we can't aggregate beliefs well, we can use polls to kind of figure out who the characteristics of more correct participants and convene better to experts in future polls, which I thought was, that was interesting. But then again, also felt that like that wasn't something that's specific to SBTs, because you can like do them a tech list right now. You can see which users generally are more correct than other users. Like you can already do that. Like you don't need an SBT to do any of it to do that. So just one of those things, and at least this one of the things I thought about this paper, just like overall, is that it mentions uh, that like a lot of things, all the use cases mentioned are like they're good, but it's also stuff that's not unique to SBTs. And it's like this also goes back to the point, like if you don't need a blockchain, like don't use it. And it's also one of those areas from this, like you probably don't need a blockchain for this. It sounds like really cool stuff, but it's like you probably don't need a blockchain for this. Like you can, I mean, this is like already being done like right now with super forecasters, and, communities like Metaculus or Kalshi. And it's like you can see people's predictions, and it's like if you can see people's predictions, like you technically already know this stuff. Uh, so you already do get that social context. So you don't necessarily need to, have SBTs on the blockchain to to find this information. Uh, and so that's like, oh, yeah, you could use an SBT for that. So you just like ruined it. And so one of the things I also mentioned is like, oh, instead of having zero sum games, we could also have something that's a little bit better regarding value distribution, reward, so that's so we can keep more people playing. But depending on that's what people just make the forecast, and it's like you don't necessarily need to have money to do forecasting. Uh, though of course you might want to with prediction market, if you actually want to, have use real money, very doable. So, dang, I'm not really, but just like SBTs. Um, because even though you can like get the social context, it's like this still doesn't really change like the incentive for why people are in prediction markets. It's like, and like sure you can find the social stuff, but it's like I still don't see how that like for people to make money on their predictions, right? It's like I don't see how it necessarily changes with just having like SBTs. I can definitely see how like it could help with the governance side, but I'm not really too sure about the reward side. But that's just like the thoughts like, from the paper. Yeah. Well, I mean, going back to it, it's like, oh, if you have teams and then teams can distribute stuff, makes sense. But still, like, I don't see how that changes a prediction market. Because once again, people are supposed to make money off other people losing their money, in their pool. Like that's kind of like how they work. So I'm not really too sure how SBCs themselves can just change that part of the prediction market. So I can see how they can, surface more more information, especially the social side, but I don't see how it necessarily changes like the zero sum side of for prediction market. From there, like all right, with AI, it's like now we can scroll around for data. It's like oh we can provide, for let's say provenance rich data, which I didn't really get. Again, you wouldn't put in this data. It's like makes no sense as provenance rich. Really, what's what you get so provenance rich, you just get more like granular data, uh, more particular to individuals. So parents just making like a data cooperative really, and then having people be able to access this based on permissions that you get from the cooperative. So it's kind of just like doing poly uh, or like data you can streamer and that's on chain. So like you would be doing the same thing. And so like with SBCs, I think really just kind of providing the social context, like, oh, this relationship connects that. So like hopefully that helps reduce biases and constants for limits, which like I'm all for this. If it can reduce algorithmic bias, like all the better. But the only problem is like you don't want this information on chain. That's really my only issue is that you don't want this information on chain. You do talk about like zero knowledge like later on in paper, of course, but it's just like this really just not like you don't want this. This you want all these attestations on chains, like, oh, great, but the problem is, like, you don't want to put information on chains. Like, a lot of the information which doesn't be on chain. Like, anyone wants, to have certain information on chain. Like, why do I want someone knowing that I clicked on a certain link on chain? Like, it doesn't need to be there. Like, of course, that's where, like, the zero knowledge proof is supposed to, like, fix that, fix this part about, the data use case. But, still, I'm not sold on the SBT because, like, from that point, you would want your SBTs to be private. But that kind of defeats the whole point of SBTs themselves. And so it's like this way that that occurs can create plural intelligence, and like all makers compete to get people's data, which is just a data marketplace and data cooperative, which is stuff that like already exists. And once SBTs themselves make data markets actually better, like I can see how it can help kind of figure out where like what kind of data you would. Honestly, on this one makes the government a bit better. Uh, uh, and of course, like as these like they're like oh property rights, extra permissions, but like honestly, I'll necessarily change the fundamental nature of those things. Because we already have that with data cooperatives right now, like polys, like they already do that. So I don't see how the SBT somehow you know, makes it better. Like I can see like how it can make it more efficient because it's on chain and this way it's just like you know faster. But I don't see how it makes the actual X better at all. So that's just my thoughts about this section. Like it can help, but I just don't see how like it provides such you know it's like a value added thing. I don't really see how it does too much. And programmable yeah, they don't really get into this one too much. But this is like, pro privacy. It's like, oh, just be able to set permissions for how people access your SBTs, if I'm correct. Yeah. And so this way you can just put permission rights. Uh, permission rights. Well, really just like access rights that go along with your SBTs. Like if someone wants specifically access to it, and like how people are supposed to interact with it. So once again, kind of like poly, kind of like solid. But once again, like do you need an SBT? It's like that's just something else going through like along the whole paper. It's like you only need an SBT to do like any of this stuff. That's to keep in mind. And once again, poly, but it's like I just want to show my membership on chains. Like one thing you can do that. I just don't see how. Okay, yeah, moving on from the. And so they're talking about like how do you actually implement this? So they don't really get into that too much. Like zero knowledge proofs, or so that way you could hide the information so people don't ever get access to it directly, but you can prove that you have it. So there are different ways of like doing private computations. So of course, zero knowledge proofs, multi-party computation, like they're different. And so like their big goal actually is like just access control, access, just send out ways people can permission access to your information, how to use it, which I'm all for. And if that's through SBTs, that's cool as well. Just are like a lot of different ways to do that. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. And they go into society, they want to avoid hyper financialization, and they do that by adding Essentially, you can get the merchant properties, so those plural network goods, which I mentioned earlier. Uh, and so, of course, gotta worry about capture, and so like we gotta worry about dystopia. And it's like we don't do like you don't want things that capture by private actors and private governments, but I think that's like inescapable. Anything that becomes super powerful or becomes super important, it's like eventually it's just gonna be a government, or it's gonna get rid of the government, or it's gonna get captured by big private actors. Like that's just how things are. It's like it's nearly unavoidable that you're going to deal with that. And of course, if they can't capture it at for example, like the protocol layer, they'll try to capture it at another layer. So that's what that Moxie was talking about regarding like Web3. It's like, oh sure, you have Ethereum protocol, centralized, neutral, whatever. But like they have OpenSea, which provides API for NFTs. And it's like everyone uses the OpenSea's API for NFTs, and it's like, oh well, if OpenSea says you don't have a doesn't say you have an NFT, then it won't show it. You can't get access to it online, even though it's in your wallet. So my point is just like things can be captured, and it's like it's nearly impossible to avoid capture. At least to me, it's like instead of trying to avoid capture, it's like try to figure out better ways of getting captured. That could also be something to think about. It's like how do we get captured in ways which doesn't screw everyone over. They're like, all right, so you want to avoid public ownership, you want to avoid private ownership, so like we want community ownership, but like that could also be a problem. Like, that's a sense that gloss over. It's like, oh, we want private, we want true public, we want true private, we want some partial and plural shared goods, but even those ones can capture can also occur. Like, that's not a kind of regardless of what kind of system you have, like capture is nearly like unavoidable because someone's always trying to game everything, and that's just how humans are. We game the system. That's just what we do. We game systems. So if you know that, like you could also know like regardless of which one you pick, like you're always going to worry about that. And I don't think they really went over it very well. Just like how going like a partial plural shared good system like avoids all of that. Uh, you know, I think it's much closer to a commons, which I prefer, but even a commons can be captured. And that's just my point. It's like you always gotta worry about capture. And capture is like I'm not too sure about that. That depends on that's a hard one to escape from. Because of course the government's much bigger entity than everyone else. Also how do you prevent rent extraction? But like I'm not too sure how you avoid that if all you ever take is a fee. Like if you're taking fees, that's rent extraction. Like that's what a fee is. Like excuse me. Of course, it's really just how much of an extraction can you take. I know that Sundial's mentioned like hyperstructure sets. It's like, oh, if you want to you provide liquidity, it's like Uniswap, you only get to take X amount of the fee. That's based on how much you provided. So how much you put in compares to how much you get out. Which makes sense. At least I wouldn't be a renter or renting a bit, you're not taking more than what you put in. So I mean, in my mind, it's actually pretty possible. I'm just not necessarily sure SBTs will lead to that, or even just putting itself leads to that. And as I mentioned, it's like DeFi right now. Even though it says it's not going for private property paradigm, it probably will go there just because of how it's being developed. And so we'll get princess direction. Unfortunately, you could get dystopian surveillance because you have whales who just harvest and move up all the data, just like Web2. And since they have all this money, they also control how things get developed. So once again, just like outside DSOC, they're like, oh, we can avoid that based on support systems, member inclusion resistance. I'm not exactly sure if that's really true. Because, once again, do people want these things to even be public? Might not necessarily happen, but at least with DSOC, you can see the sociality, the relationship between people. But things you can see the relationship between people. Like that doesn't necessarily stop any of these things happening. Because like we can see a lot of relationships right now. Like we can see especially like lobbying, it's like we can see who's giving money to who. It doesn't change like how things are going. Uh, But once again, I'm just kind of like pessimistic on SBTs. It's like going for like a really big goal, which I definitely like. I'm just not sure how SBTs themselves actually prevent any of these things. In a way that's like it's like actually doable uh, with how things are like actually structured right now. You know, things that can be help with silver resistance, which I think it definitely can. Vampire resistance, I'm not actually too sure about that one because we haven't actually seen that happen, so I'll wait on that. Collusion, uh, ooh, I think quality scores help, but once again, we haven't actually seen that yet. So at least with vampires and inclusions, it's like we haven't seen that yet. And greater strength, composability, uh, you know, nice parts like you can also compose new relationships, new communities. So that's really kind of like a strength. Excuse me. So I think that's actually really cool. But of course, that in itself can be a little problematic. But so of course, seems that when people are composing, like the people who get to compose, or this is the totality. But of course, we know like only certain people are in Web3, and those people come from certain groups. So like if those people are the ones just composing everything, it's like well, it's not really composability when it's really just run by like only certain groups. So another thing that this one made me think about is like oh, who's in Web3? But then later points like, oh, this you don't necessarily reach the diminishing returns or the good not necessarily getting congested, but a blockchain does get congested, so that's or you have exhaustion. You don't necessarily get that with DSOC because it just compounds as the network grows. And I thought that was a really interesting point. It's like since it just grows based on connections, like it can all be bigger. And it's like, oh, we can build a network based on trust, but once again, I wouldn't say any of this is actually trust. You know, that in itself becomes kind of problematic. You know, I'd say it's just based on intersectionality, but not trust. And it's like, want to avoid DeFi, but I'm not too sure if, this actually avoids any of these, like, actual problems, though. And, I think it does help, at least on the resilient side, but once again, people don't know when someone actually like, puts this on practice because this is like some really big lots of goals. And then they mention it's like, oh, well, bad things can have SBTs, can real discrimination, oh, with these songs, it's like, oh, it's like, is it worse than other dystopias? No, which I thought was just horrible. It's like, dystopia is a dystopia. That doesn't, this is a little bit better than another dystopia. Doesn't make it a good thing. So like, I thought that's like a really bad way of approaching talking about the dystopia that are like the negative consequences of well DSOC. It's like instead of just saying like these are like consequences of DSOC, like well DSOC is better than all these other dystopias. Like to me that's just kind of like doesn't seem like a work. Like I'm really just going about describing uh, the bad parts of DSOC and at least the negative features that can come about with it. And so, one of the things like these, like relying on horizontal socializations, which is, interesting. But, of course, problem becomes, you have to put things on chain. And so, actually, let me just kind of go through this. As I mentioned, collusion, really bad. Put things like, how they prevent collusion, sociality. But, of course, you can see relationships that doesn't actually prevent these things from happening. But it's like, sure, you can see it, but it's like, can you stop it? Like, to me, that's kind of the issue with DSOC and SBT. It's like, oh, we can like it doesn't prevent collusion. It just lets you see collusion. And just because you can see it doesn't mean you can prevent it. And I know like they're with SBT, it's like, oh, based on this relationship, we can discount this amount of voting power. We can do this. I'm like, okay, that to me seems like possible solutions, and that's not like I'll definitely like try it. At least in my mind should be. and that's like to me a good use of like SVTs on this paper. Like, I actually do like most of the stuff, uh, especially I just not to say like, oh, we can like prevent collusion. I think you can make collusion harder, but not necessarily prevent it. And you know, this you can see the sociality. As we can explicitly prevent the centralism, but implicitly we can't because of course you can have habits at different levels of the system. And they mentioned institutional asset managers, which is a really good point. Too. And so from there, they're like, all right, so we have the social substrate, the social side. You can see, how people diverge, relationships between people, and in sales in this way we can actually be like, all right, no, this is being this way towards one class instead of benefiting everyone. So this way we clients, so that's better. So once again, it helps you see relationships. I think that's a really great way, and hopefully you can use that to for community-based government. But once again, possible because once again, like who gives money to Web3 projects? Like those are really the ones who make things happen. So like even if you could see a sociality, I'm not really too sure that can actually stop anything. Because like sure, it's like oh we're gonna make a DAO, and that's like you could give like 60% of voting power to like the institutional asset managers. And it's like well, sure communities like they can vote, but it's like they don't have as much power. It's like what happens with like a lot of companies which get in public markets like Google, like the founders, I'm forgetting the names. Like they still have the most voting power than any other class of shareholders. So even though it's a public company, it's like it's still technically run by the founders. So it's one of those things. I mean, you get to see the relationship, but it's like even if you could see the relationships, like once again, I'm just like I don't even you can see a relationship. I'm not really too sure you can stop this from happening because once again, like I was saying, like sure you have the founders, they want their take, but also it's like investors want their take, and like they really even if you get short relationship, like they want to care. Like give me, they're like we want our percentage of voting power. So I like these. Like I think, and that's it was really helpful. Of course, you don't necessarily need SPTs to do most of the stuff. Uh, but I just like the fact you can see relationships. But it's like I'm not too sure like how effective it could be in stopping their diverging the money class users. I think you can see that all the time. Like to me, that's just like obvious. It's like if you understand platforms, you understand and the major companies, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, you understand any of them. Like you can see this already. Like you need the SBTs to like to see the divergence. But SBTs do helps. So I'm just not like once again, I'm just not necessarily sold on like being able to stop this with just SBTs, and even by this comes from voting power and whatnot. Like I think that's helpful, but once again, that's just stuff that's on chain. Like what about the stuff that's off chain? And the problem is most relationships are off chain, and especially for investors, like like AC seems Z, like they're not getting this money on chain. They're getting all this money off chain, and it's like you can't see that on chain. It's like sure you could show it on the relationships, like oh they invested X amount, and it's like my point is like they're always gonna have bigger influence over these companies than the users because they gave them the money. And it's like sure you can see a relationship, but it's like and then if they make a DAO, it's like it's like they're still gonna get their cut, and their cut might just screw over people. It's like that's just my point. It's just that it's like how effective can this be in actually stopping these things? That's just me being pessimistic. So it's like so you can avoid centralization because it's just built from the ground up. People's relationships just happen to kind of bounce. And with SVTs, it's not inherently democratic, but you can be democratic. And It just allows people to be, you know, co-determined. So, you know, so it's not necessarily democratic, but it just leans more towards the participatory side of things, or the libertarian side of things. So the challenges, like I was writing the paper on about, recording side channels, that's also a big concern. Also, most people aren't going to make this stuff public, and that's so it's like a lot of stuff said. You know, of course, obvious thing to do, always store the data off chain. Don't know why I'd ever put it on chain. And of course, over there you get to choose where to reveal or not, so that's where you use zero knowledge proofs and other privacy preserving mechanisms. So like to me that all makes sense. It's like you might want to store in IPFS or somewhere else, like kind of like whatever. But like once again, it's like, do you actually need SBTs for this? No. And it's like, what's the actual innovation here? The actual innovation is really zero knowledge proofs, but can't you do it yet? Like, we're not necessarily yet, but we're getting there. Like, there's so much work being on zero knowledge proofs, and it's such an amazing field. I think we'll get to a point where like, have all this stuff, but you actually need SBTs. Like, you don't need a token to to do this stuff. It's like to keep reiterating that point because I think the paper and this to talk about it's like, oh, like tokens, like you don't need Web3. Sorry, actually I take back, you can use Web3. You don't necessarily need a blockchain. Like IPFS is Web3, but once again it's not a blockchain. And as I said, add permissions, and once again that's kind of like the solid projects. Kind of like a lot of other projects. I mean, they get into whole credentials a little bit later on, but a lot of things. So we just like to use zero knowledge proof, modify computation. And so SVTs help with social provenance. Though I'm not really too sure about that. It's, I don't know, to me, it's not really social provenance. It's just, which groups people are associated with, and then if something, I guess, like a deep fake comes out, you can trace the transaction, of course, on chain. But I'm not really too sure how that gives you the social provenance. You just know like what groups this person was in that was associated with this NFT, but that doesn't actually it doesn't necessarily mean anything. And to be honest, I don't see necessarily how that reduces the value of copy pasted data. Because to me, it's like the fact that I copied someone's NFT by itself just automatically means it's not that valuable. Like I don't think you really need. Once again, I don't think you need SBTs to like know this. Just saying. And as I mentioned, like unverified origins, but I don't see how that's really possible. Is that I'm going to assume you put everything on chain, which you don't. And even if you did, like you'll need someone's specific attestation, to have specific attestations for something to be true. Like I think that once again leads to like a problem where like they're trying to prove truth, but once again, blockchains don't provide truth. They provide they tell you facts. Like X thing happened at X time. It doesn't tell you the truth of it, because you need the context there. And so like trying to get that with the sociality, but sociality just tells you like those relationships. So it doesn't actually give you like true context. Like just telling someone about like the relationship someone's has doesn't necessarily tell you the context of content. I think that's something that they didn't really get into too much. Something that they kind of talk about FTs. And one of the things I mentioned is like native reputation, and that's like where like the whole thing goes really bad. At least to me, it's like like people should be able to choose what they want to share about themselves, and they're like, oh well, with SVTs, we're just gonna make everything like pretty much public. Like that about unpaid loans, negative reviews, and complaints. Uh, and then those kind of things. But like one of the things I was reading this article by Molly White, where she was giving some comments about specifically this part. It's like what about prison records? And she's commenting on his podcast with Vitalik and Evan McMullen from the Disco Project were on the Disco Project Balance about Firepack credentials. Talking about like, oh with this one it's just gonna be like it's like, oh yeah, people might want to see like if you have your criminal record, like we want to see that. And like before I engage with someone, like, oh, I might want to see your criminal record, and it's like, wait a minute, like, well, where's the most? We have laws preventing people from just looking at other people's like, actually, do we? I think certain records, but not adult records. At least in certain capacities, you can see people's criminal records, but you can't just be like, oh, let me just like we can see, of course, the legal stuff, and it's like, oh, well, this person got sent for this and that, but you can't necessarily just like dig into like everyone's like criminal records all willingly. Like, they can, of course, like court judgments and whatnot, just those are public. You know, but once again, make certain things, but like, but we keep certain things right. But also, if you're just like beating someone, it's like, can't imagine somebody like, oh, can I see your criminal record before we talk to each other? And that's kind of probably negative reputation. It's just like, like what does this actually tell you about the person? And instead of negative reputation include credit history, it's like one person is like, oh, they have a bad credit score. That doesn't make them a bad person. Well, they have some unpaid loans. Once again, it doesn't make them a bad person. Someone has negative reviews. Those could all be fake. Those could be fake reviews. Uh, and so if we're using SBTs, like, oh, we can have fake reviews, but once again, SBTs just tell us the sociality. It doesn't tell us like whether something's true or not. Most importantly, it doesn't tell us if it's actually, that's the thing. It doesn't tell us it's true. It doesn't tell us like it's actually been verified. All we know is that where it came from. Uh, regarding the parties involved, like we know that came from this person who has these SBTs, and we can see that this person retweeted it. Oh, and he has these SBTs, so it might help you there. But like, it doesn't tell you anything else other than that. And I think it's like, at least with these negative reputational ones, it's like all of these things shouldn't be on chain. I think it's like most people don't want this stuff on chain anyway. Let's say it got picked up for like something. It's like, oh, yeah, like something bad that happened, and it's like, it's like, it might happen, when you're young. And it's like, people make mistakes, And the problem that I feel with this one, especially with negative irritations and something that Molly White really picked up on, was like, you know, the way people are gonna treat you is gonna be different. If they know your reputation before they even meet you. That's not like that's not everyone knows. Like that's what you don't necessarily want to put on chain. I think it's like if it's on chain, it's public and invisible. Anyone can take a look at it. And I think since it's now available, now people will just take a look. You know, having that be hard to get is something that's kind of nice. And I just think chain from like the stores, which is cool. But the problem is that if you put an SBT on it, it's like give you the contents. What else? A negative review. It's like here's the review. Do you want to see the content? You can ask for permission. And everyone's gonna ask for permission. It's that's kind of the thing. In my mind, it's like it brings things up from the real world, which once again we probably don't want to put on chain, at least not this way. And things and things it's like going back to the dystopia. It's like well, this is not the worst dystopia, but it's like this is still pretty bad. I'll get into a little bit this one. Of course, you know, governance should we use to govern to share data to be off. It's like, oh, we have SVTs, but we didn't really think about the rest of some of the other stuff. And of course, and as you mentioned, people can cheat. Was of course, it's true. People can be bribed. Deals can be bribed. Uh, and I thought that was a point I could not just a dystopia, but like the ways that things can just go wrong. people, you know, gaming is always a thing, and they mentioned like how they deter gaming while using norms. You know, as I said, thick community channels like so you kind of use SVTs to show relationships off chain. Once again, that can be problematic. Like in communities, use it to detect exclusive patterns and penalize authentic behavior. I'm not really too sure what inauthentic. What's authentic? And of course, you can use zero knowledge proofs. Uh, so you can prevent people from making certain attestations, which just aren't true. It's like, I kind of attest that I'm a doctor, so that's, possible. There's lots of ways you can try to prevent gaming. You can also use peer protection. So if you don't expect them to be honest, so they can get rewarded. Because of course it's based on everyone else's prediction. And then also check correlation scores. It's like certain times for people to be honest. Yeah, especially when they share a common interest. Interesting comparisons, limitations. It's like, oh, that's how you compare to everything else, and they're like, ours is better than everything else. I'm not too sure about that. So that's the thing. So forget that. Don't know sure SVTs are actually that much of an improvement. Countries powering the issuer, and can turn to unreliable bureaucracies, which I definitely do agree there. And it's like they're like, well, we just have horizontal networks, just it's supposed to be better, but as I mentioned earlier, like it can lead to some problems. It's economy from if things don't turn out well, just change to another wallet. So you can transfer your attestations from wallet to another. So if something goes wrong, just switch to another wallet. I think that's really good. Kind of, that's more like victim amounts rather than just contextualizing the attacker. So yeah, I prefer the SBT approach, which is like just letting people have their SBTs. Like you don't have to leave your account, and also as you mentioned, try to avoid Sybil's Sybil attacks. It's hard to prove provenance. It's not people using new wallets, and it's hard to figure out correlations. So I agree with them on that point that SVTs make more sense. I think more from that when people get canceled, it's actually usually because they do something in context, which is just bad. I find pretty rare that someone gets canceled for something that they did, which was necessarily out of context. I mean, sometimes you do get people, for example, coming back at like comedians for like really old jokes, which are inappropriate now, which might not have been inappropriate at the time they made their joke. That they made their joke. Like that I get, but that's still pretty rare, and usually that doesn't like ever stop a comedian from like still getting certain positions. So that's pretty rare. So to me, I didn't think that was really as much as as they mentioned. It's like, if an artifact comes out, hit the victim's community, and we should cast down the veracity of it, which I'm still not too sure about. This like a lot of things come out, and it's rarely ever within the victim's community. Like a lot, like most of the bad things that come out, people are outside their community, or at least outside like their network. So, like if you're like a public figure, like something bad about you might come out, and it might not be from your network. Someone from your network might have given it, but it usually comes out of it, and it's like you might not expect these things to ever come back to your network. Just once again, like we punish whistleblowers. So I think in that sense, like you might not ever be able to trace it back to the victim's community because people don't want to put themselves in harm's way, and so that shouldn't necessarily cast out on the piece of veracity because people, you know, it's just for whistleblowers, like they gotta worry about their safety. So I just thought that part itself, you know, wouldn't necessarily make sense in every situation, and does lead to some weird, issues because it's like what does it mean to be canceled? Also, it's like trying to trace the origin of a hit piece is like, you know, that's all it's gonna be hard. And like I said, if you have a whistleblower, they're not gonna tell you, so you're not gonna know if it connects back, and you don't want to put people in danger. So like, this in itself could actually be somewhat used, once again, dystopic to prevent whistleblowers. So to also worry about. So I think they can use that to like, figure out who's the attacker, hold them accountable. It's like, well, one of the cases a whistleblower. Well, you wouldn't want that. So that's the thing about. Okay, so yeah, I should probably hurry up through this. So they mentioned person, once again, a little bit more individualized. It's a little bit limited because once again, you need people to have global uniqueness. So you gotta treat everyone the same. And it's like, it prevents civil, but just makes it more costly. So their approach, let's go intersectional, uh, from the ground up, which is also interesting. So that's just different. Again, do prevent civil. I just think that SVCs can probably do it in a way that might be a little bit cheaper, and just more intersectional. But I didn't see how it was. That's like in ways just like a lot better than proof of person. I don't necessarily see how that's a different way of doing it in a way that might not be as much as expensive, and also there are some they're like, oh well, peer-to-peer lending, whatnot, only makes sense if you can determine relationships. So like SECs, I think do have an advantage there, but then also I think a lot of person projects are just trying to do like basic income or establish things for democracies. So I think it's just different use cases. So I wouldn't necessarily say that's actually better. They're trying to do different things. Though I do think you could, at least that's just like my opinion. I think SVCs make more sense for the use case that it goes for. Then you have verifiable credentials. Hopefully you guys know what that is. So, verifiable credentials are just really attestations that people can give up at their discretion. So there are problems with these variable credentials, VCs, this W3C standard. The other big problem is that you allow privacy, like you get, it's not compatible with their use cases. So you only can't know if someone holds an SBT unless it's shared with them. So you have to share it directly, so it does make something a little bit harder for, it's like you're doing peer-to-peer lending, like that does make it a little bit harder trying to figure out where it's collusion. Does make it harder, so like that actually does make sense. That's a very valid concern. Also, I want to like control private property. Uh, that's also a little bit of a problem. That's like you don't know someone, you don't know that property until you transfer it, and also it's like it's harder to share. But not thoroughly convinced about that one. You know, it's something that just kind of goes back to like just like the price part, but like I don't necessarily see how that's changed the property regime too much as much as just that. Actually it does. It's just the granularity of access. Like you can do different types of access uh, with uh, with SBTs rather than with like VCs, where it's just like one type of access. It's like you either get all the access or no access. So I think that's really what they're trying to go. It's like to me, at least that makes sense. At least they say on the limitations parts. Uh, and so at least with that, that's made them to have like more provisions. And have ways which is a little bit more public so people can know what SBT like regarding comparing VCs to SBTs. Though, excuse me, have as I said, there are like natural complements because VCs pretty much, of course, make things private as it should be, while SBTs make things public, and it's like you want to do social recovery, but I still don't see how SBTs are really that great for that. That's where they're supposed to complement each other. Uh, but I do prefer, things just, and then really, I do prefer the SBT approach of just having more granular permissions. But once again, you only need SBTs to do that. And so, then next up, Solberg, it's like, oh, well, all right, since, yeah, it's like, well, you probably start with a couple transferable tokens, can you recover wallets, have custodial wallets, or you want to have like decentralized decentralized non-custodial wallets to strapping community recovery, which can happen, norms, and yeah, that's pretty much the paper. And I also mentioned some other books to get to DSOCs like Sprightly, ACDC. So those are ones that tie the source to local machines rather than global ledgers. I like the idea of well, SBTs. Uh, Same with VCs, but they both kind of lead to some weird issues. Uh, you know, Unfortunately, as much as they say like, oh, we're gonna avoid dystopias, and it's gonna be a little bit not as bad as the other ones. It's still dystopia, is still dystopia. But I think even the dystopias in mentioning this paper with SPCs are actually avoidable, as long as keep in mind that like SPCs are not like at least in my opinion they're not the only way of going about things, and most importantly that like once again you don't need things on chain. Like most of the time you don't need a blockchain. I think that because that's kind of the thing with a lot of these papers are probably like, oh, it's like blockchain, but it's like you probably don't need a blockchain. And like at least when it comes to, like digital identity, it's like it's not about technology. And I think the problem with SBT is like it's very it's very much about the blockchain, and so I think could be well problematic. But this they didn't really get into a lot of stuff about how you can use it in the metaverse. Just not necessarily in the physical world either. It's like user quality, but keep. But they mentioned like, oh, we should still try to figure out like how do we make it decent. Whether that's SBTs or not, we should still pursue it, which I think makes a lot of sense. And their goal, let's have more sociality and just running over trust. Let's put social relationships embedded in it, and I think that actually does make a lot of sense. Like I do like intersectional social identity because it makes a lot more sense than just self-sovereign identity because of like how relationships actually develop and how identities like actually develop. Usually all in relation to our communities, the people around us. Taking account the fact that we're not just individuals, we're people who live in an environment, and we interact with others. And once again, we're a social species. Like that's what we do. So like it doesn't really make sense to like, well, to just be individuals. Like you also need the social. To me, it's both. You just have the individual and the social. Once you have an of development, which like human, then from there the appendix, and from the and so that's pretty much uh, pretty pretty, so so you can see that's really where the neighborhoods are changing. I think it's like one of the like
Nosedive. Nosedive is a satire on acceptance and the image of ourselves we like to portray and project to others. It stars Bryce Dallas Howard, who's fantastic, and she's playing a character called Lacey, who lives her life trying to please everyone.
Lacey is lost. She's lost herself in this world where she thinks that her value is equivalent to her points.
2 stars? 2 stars?
Wasn't a meaningful encounter.
Everyone is a little bit heightened and false because everyone's terrified of being marked down because the consequences of that are unpleasant. So it's basically the world we live in.
So, have you seen this episode? No, it's like I thought, it just, raised very kind of, really some like the negative side of things. It's personal, but it's not necessarily as like in your face and not necessarily as public. Paper. Wait, has an interesting concept. Like, that's kind of one, here. And so, well, I'm up privacy source centralization. Of course, I can mention this, and wasn't this, it wasn't this WorldCoin project, which is horrible. That's terrible uses of personhood to get here to this point about soulbound tokens from World of Warcraft, not surprisingly. That I think is one of Vitali's favorite games. So here, Molly discussed comments on a podcast, a Bankless podcast, featuring Vitalik and Evan McMullen. Talking about soulbound tokens and verifiable credentials. Bruce Heron, mentions like, we should let people know about negative attestations. And so, Molly, states something obvious, just like, everything be public. What is this obvious? And, but then it's like, I was just used to it enough, which is, possible, but also it's like, still, everything needs to be public. And this, the criminal record parts, this thing that Molly mentions, this Vitalik mentions it in the pod. He's like, oh, showing about the criminal record before we interact with them. That's very problematic. And it's like, do we want police departments putting things on, putting up your criminal record on chain? And these attestations don't go even further. It's like, for things like you might not get convicted of something, but doesn't mean you don't have like a criminal record. Like if you get picked up by the police, and might not be for something big, might be for something small, but it's like, you have a record there at the place, like they picked you up, and it's like, of course you don't have to tell anyone about this, you didn't get convicted or anything, it's like nothing happened, but it's like, not necessarily the police were just putting that online, on the, putting an attestation of that on chain, that's something that's, that, Molly, made a really, very good point about, it's like, there's nothing stopping that from happening in this SBT world. And of course, that's a negative attestation. It's like, that looks really bad on you. It's like, why do you get picked up by the cops? And it's like, people don't necessarily want to associate those, people who have criminal records. Like, here in the US, like, we know that. We also know that, sometimes the government does systematically, harms, minorities, for example, African Americans, by trying to get them involved in the criminal justice system, by hitting them with petty crimes, or trying to get them for certain things which are called crimes but really shouldn't be. For example, jaywalking, which is not a crime, but in the in the books, like it's a crime. But of course, you cannot see anyone's like, oh, should crossing the street be a crime? And everyone will tell you no. But yeah, it's on the books as a crime, and that's when cops can pick you up for it. Cops don't like necessarily pick up for anything, right? And it's like people do sometimes people might do like no content. Sorry, I just pronounced it really wrong, but no contender. They'll take a lower conviction instead of a higher one, so that they can get it out faster. And once again, people can just see the criminal record. It's like, oh, you got picked up for this, but it's like, well, I didn't actually do that, but I had to take that so I wouldn't get stuck with something bigger because I didn't want to be in get stuck for like you know stuck in jail for too long. Those are real things. But the thing is that if you put it on chain, you put us in SBT, it's like now that decision's there, and people might not want to associate with those people. Those people, once again, uh, might harm their future earning potential. Like that can really harm you if those things were just put on chain. Like now it's public and everyone can see it. Like you might like this, and once again, as I was saying, like the government, sometimes doesn't engage in systematic, practices which harm certain minority groups. So like, that could happen, and they could put that on chain to harm those groups. It's like you don't want that happening. And you can also think of like the no-fly list. It's like if someone gets put on a no-fly list, it's like does that mean they're a bad person? Not necessarily. Some people are on. I remember meeting someone who was on a no-fly list, but like they were like like 15, like they got put on no-fly list when they were a kid. They don't know why they are, but they're just on the no-fly list. And it's like once again, it's like is that negative attestation? Like yes. It's like why you're in a no-fly list. And it's like, oh man, they might not necessarily know, but it's like if I look at it and someone looks at it, they're like, oh well, this person could be, they might do negative things. And it's just like, really that's really the problem with putting everything on chain. It's it's like that kind of information can be used against people, and if people know that it can be used against them, they'll put it on. And I mean they do mention in the paper, it's like you want the dystopia of people putting this stuff on, but it's like there's a reason I don't necessarily want every attestation on it, and most people don't need to know this. Like like what do people need to know? Like if you want to put something on a blockchain, it's something that everyone needs to know and should be public. That's really when it makes sense. But things like a lot of things people don't need to know. And like someone's criminal record, like most of us do not need to know a criminal record. Unless the only time is like it's like when you're applying to a job, it's like, oh well, I need to go check this because depending on what kind of job you're doing, I might need to know, right? And like otherwise, it's like other than that, like no one ever needs to. And also, like, also depends like what kind of crime are we, also talking about too? Because like certain crimes people commit, like they'll commit like really heinous crimes, and next thing you know, they're like out doing the same thing they were doing before. And like if you look at like financial crimes, like those big time crimes, I think it's like what's that? I think it's Michael Cohen. Like I think he might get hit for like no, he didn't get hit for securities fraud. Like some of the other people who was worried about got hit with securities fraud, but like a big time guy, on he was going to investigate. He didn't get, convicted. Well, at least I'm hoping I'm remembering that correctly. But just think about some of these guys who get, like, who commit like these big, financial crimes. Sometimes they, sometimes they get caught for it. Some of them do time. Other times, sometimes people just, get picked up, do a little bit, come back, and just do the same thing. And it's like, oh, okay, but like, which crime is worse? Like, and that's things like who's gonna get punished for these negative attestations? And more likely than not, it's the people who are already being punished for those negative attestations. So like, just by putting these things on chain doesn't automatically mean that at least a better situation for people. I'm sure you can see the sociality how people have these relationships, but that doesn't necessarily once again stop. You know, like we already live in a certain society, and just by putting these attestations on chain doesn't necessarily change that society. It might help us, see how the society is actually running, but it doesn't necessarily like change it automatically. Hopefully it could help in that direction, but I just don't necessarily see that happening just from the existence of SBTs. I think that's really what's my problem with just like this whole paper. Is just like this SBTs by themselves don't really achieve any of these goals. they can be helpful, but by themselves, I'm like, I don't necessarily see how they you achieve that or necessarily make society just by their existence. But hopefully I'm wrong though. Because if I'm wrong, then that's good for society. Yeah, mind based on yes, right there. But one thing is like also like well, Return probably does have a preference for it being Ethereum. It's like well, it's like oh you only need a blockchain, but it's like well if you want SBTs you have to use a blockchain. So that's kind of my point. It's like you can't avoid the blockchain part, even though you don't need a blockchain. And once again, like you really don't need a blockchain, so but they're kind of forcing you to put things on a blockchain. And yeah, as I mentioned, it's like it's really cheap to just figure out people's criminal history. It's like well people are always going to ask for it. And that's something that employers already do like in the real world because well they can get it. But then it's like can you imagine like you're gonna go play a game and and there's a point that's it's like it's such a and it's like, we're gonna play a game with their children in there and let's say you have a record and somebody involves children. It's like well now they're gonna ask for it because they can just see it on chain, right? It's like oh it's gonna be really quick to compute for them. And it's like, well, boom, it's not there. You can't enter. It's really kind of that thing. Like, these kind of it's like the purely benefit of the criminal justice system. Those are ones who, like, doesn't matter if they have it. Like, they're fine. And, like I was saying earlier, it's like which crimes are gonna, you know, be valued or, like, well, be an evidence. It's like, but also it's like, race plays a role. It's like, even if, you know, someone who's like African American or Latino, it's like, well, what's the crime they got hit with? I was like, jaywalking. Yeah, but it's like all races into account. It's like, well, who's going to be asked about it? It's like, who's more likely to have it? So once again, like, you put the system up, it's like it doesn't necessarily stop discriminating, and that's my point. Is just like, it doesn't necessarily just change society by itself. It doesn't necessarily make it better by itself. Is it possible to do so? I think so, but that's a monumental challenge. Like changing society is a monumental challenge, and I don't think like blockchain and SBTs by themselves can achieve that. Especially if you're just gonna put negative attestations up. Because if you put negative attestations up, everyone's gonna ask for it, and most people are gonna be blocked. And it's just like once again, you know, point about technology is like, does it activate or does it reinforce? And more than that, just reinforces. And I think SBTs, as cool as they are, like if you just leave it up to people's own devices, they're just gonna reinforce what's already going on. It's like how any other technology before it, it's like even Ethereum itself does reinforce a lot of excuse me a lot of things in our current society. Like some of like just proof of work, and it's like oh who can afford the most resources. Well, who can afford the most mind power are the ones who get the most reward. And once again, who's that skewed toward? The people who have more money. So like once again, it's like you gotta recreate an Ethereum. It's like I don't necessarily think it's really escapable. I don't think blockchain just SBTs themselves can do that. And once again, like you know, even though they didn't mention here, it's like oh you have access permissions. The problem is it's like do you have actual consent? And that kind of goes once again with like privacy policies and like people it's like oh it's like oh you consent to us doing this with your data. It's like well if I don't consent I can't use the service. And so like there's really no actual consent because well sorry there's no meaningful consent because there's no true choice. And that's kind of some problem here. It's like sure you can ask people can be like oh yeah I'm not gonna give permission, but it's like well if you want to get into this game you want to get into this metaverse we're gonna need to see your your criminal record or your attestations, your SBTs regarding that. It's like, well, boom, there you go. It's like, you can't, you don't really have that consent. Because, of course, the problem is that the same, like, it seems that the games and these other stuff that's beyond chain won't ever, like, they won't ask. But things like if they can ask, then they're probably gonna do it. And then once again, going into access to servers is like if you do it, it's like there is no actual consent, but actual consent means you can say no, and that's it's not gonna harm you if if you say no. So I thought that's a really good point that Molly made. Then we get to verifiable credentials, and another good point Molly made regarding this use just blockchain channels. It's like, oh, if someone just sends you tokens, like, there's no, there's no consent regarding being sent tokens. So that's something also think about, even with like soul drops. To be honest, it's like, it's like sure, based on society, but like let's say I'm just part of certain communities and people start just soul dropping me. But also let's keep in mind, realistically, people will soul drop influential people because they want to grow. So even if someone's not in the community, they're still gonna drop them. And I think even in that case, even if I do have the SBTs, like let's say I don't want to be part of the community and just drop me, a soul drop, and like, oh, I got this freaking SBT that I don't ever want. It's like, thank you. And it's also, guess what? It's not transferable, so I can't transfer it. So I'm stuck with this thing I don't want. So that's also another problem too, is people getting sent tokens. Like, sure, we can do soul drops, but like, what if I don't want it? I keep in mind, I don't. There's not an actual good incentive for for any like DAO which does soul drops to actually take back the soul drops, because once again they don't want, they want to expand. They want to show that there's a network, that there are people who want to use use the DAO's goods and services, or just be part of the community. So there's no incentive for them to ever revoke any of these soul drops. So that's also another point, which doesn't get mentioned in the paper like at all. But Mario is here. I think it's a really good point. It's like it's like sure we're talking about consent to access my information, but like what about consent on being dropped tokens? Like that's also another thing to mention. And then we get to verifiable credentials. Let's see here. And as we talked about earlier with VCs, VCs is like people to ask for permission, and and attestation on part of it. Just kind of like, just hear my certifications and like, here we go. And she like VCs, and it's like, well, like we can't really have fun together if we don't don't let anybody's how much money you have. It's like, well, what are your other connections? Which of course makes sense, but also you could just ask people. It's a little Facebooky. It's like instead of just asking people like what are they into, whether like this is like, oh well, just show me your Facebook, and then I'll go from there. Which is kind of funny. It's like let's say people just start dating just based straight off Tinder profiles. Like it's like of course you can see the profile, but it's like it doesn't make any sense until you actually like meet the person. So yeah, it's like it's kind of like a first step, but it's also a little bit strange. So it's like, well, our relationship is just gonna be based on what you've shown me. That's it. And it's like, you want to write something, I need to see your profile. But it's like, you could always just ask. And then it's like, the profile itself is not very useful because once again, people are going to put everything about themselves there. Like, if you want to write songs, I need you can write music. But like, that's not the biggest thing. The biggest thing is like, can we work together? What you want to know really is rather someone's temperament and their general personality, not really if they can write music. Uh, that's actually secondary, hilariously, because you don't want to work with someone who's a bad partner. I think we've all had group projects where like you've done work and we have a partner who did the work, but it's like they might not have necessarily been the best person to work with. I think that matters a lot more people than just whether they have the ability to to write music. And that's something that Molly really touches upon, and then she mentions this quote from Philip Sheldrake's Refers with the SSI syndrome. I think that was a really good point. Everyone's kind of be forced to just offer up their attestations or credentials like right away, and just when it's easy and it's cheap, which goes back to Black Mirror, so it's connected to. It's like, oh, as you can see my score. Though I'm not sure they showed it here, but it's kind of like the my expectations. And it's like, that's the first stage of building trust, isn't, meeting, talking, getting to know people. It's like first stage is like, just show me your score, or show me your Facebook, pretty much. It's like, now your Facebook page rather than, the human. So it's kind of like dehumanizing a little bit if you really think about it. And, I just thought that was a really interesting point. And I thought this is also really good point. It's like, it's kind of all dehumanizing where it's like, just show me your Facebook profile, just show me your interests. So, building that sharing connection. And, as I mentioned, all this stuff, takes a more pessimistic approach. One thing I thought it's a good point that she was like, we're data custody and security. It's like, oh, sure, you can put all its SBTs or put all on chain, but it's like, oh, well, they have to have a wallet, and it's like, oh, well, I have to secure my wallet, and it's like, not necessarily everyone wants to do self custody, and so now wants to do self custody, they could do custodial wallets, and it's like, oh, that's centralized. Of course, we're trying to avoid that, but then again, most people don't want to deal with this, and then if that happens, then we have a lot of centralization, which means we have a party which has a lot of power. But of course, we could see their, socially, we could see the relationships. Like, sure, we know they have a lot of power, but it's like we can't necessarily stop their power. And I just thought it was really a point about like, about there's like acceptable, dystopian project, which to me just sounds kind of crazy that you would even say like it's an acceptable dystopia. It's like at this least a dystopia. It's like you should try to do something else, at least in my opinion. I think like this is actually, at least in my mind, once again, like there's many possible futures. Dystopia is just one of them that you can get from SVTs. Of course, I know they want to make it really positive, but one problem with that is that it doesn't seem to me like they're trying to avoid a dystopia. They're like, we're not going to try to avoid the negative things. Ours is just less negative than the other, so we've done our job. Which to me just didn't make any sense. It's like if you know that this is gonna lead to something bad, like you should try rather than just say it's not the worst. So that was one of my other gripes with this. And I thought Molly just made some really good points. But I did like the fact that they mentioned data collectors and also like prediction markets. I thought those were interesting, but once again, my point is like you only need blockchain to do digital identity. Once you have variable credentials, you have this one's identifiers. Those are different ways. It's like I don't think visas themselves are necessarily bad. I just don't necessarily like the way Mom was kind of going about it because it sounds like this dive. Just kind of a dehumanization. Instead of seeing people as people, we just see them as their Facebook profiles. And I think that's unfortunately a little too dehumanizing. At least at this point. I do like social reality that comes up with SBTs though, because then that leads to some interesting ways of trying to improve governance and detecting how things are. Well, governance and also just like community growth and just like how communities actually interact. So I think that helps there. So I mean, I think SBTs do have like some actual uses. I'm just not sure they go as far as DSOC or go as far as they might think in paper. And also that you don't need you know we just need to see more experimentation. People try VCs, people try as soon as identifiers, people try SBTs, so let's see which one actually better outcomes. We have to stick with any of these solutions. So the best thing is just like experiment with compare solutions, find the best one, and if possible find better solutions to experiment. Shout out to Aquarius and what else? And prediction markets. Though I still feel that's much more for like oracles. That's what I was looking for in the blockchain, but you could use it here too. but it's kind of the same thing like an oracle too. It's like trying to provide information from off chain and put it on chain. So yeah, never get away from that. But also another thing too, is like that was really funny. Going back to like just gaming things like ways to lots of ways you got to prove that. So not fleets are available with SBTs because it's not just positive attestations, negative attestations. So we know how negative attestations get used against certain groups, and generally, how those attestations get put on certain groups. So that in itself is problematic. But overall, I actually did like the paper. I thought it had some really good points, and really just helping add to the discussion on different ways we can you identify ourselves in digital spaces, especially from an intersectional social identity perspective. So I thought that was really interesting. Though I don't like the use of the term soul identity just works fairly fine since that actually is like what what you're doing. Like we already have a term for it, so we're good there. But I did like the that car part though. Once again, I don't think you really need SPTs. Uh, so of course, if you have some affiliation, you use a token for that. It's like technically that's an SPT. It's like it feels like a lot of things will count as SPT. Uh, so like you'll have SVTs, but I'm not too sure like the SVT necessarily makes anything better. That's really just like kind of my whole point about this paper. Like I like it. I think it's really cool, great discussion, but like, I'm not really too sure how it like makes a lot of things. Makes division wise, like how I actually choose division. I mean, they didn't really get into that, so that can also be part of it. But also, other things that like doesn't necessarily make a DAO card better. That's once again like code of the DAO card is to get that and sell it, provide permissions, access control. Once again, you don't need SBTs for that. Like once again, to me, that's just like proofs or having some other type of off-chain thing. But once again, that's not actually SBT. I mean, obviously, it's the mesh SBT specific. Or like really, it's like oh, you have SBT, but you also need all this other stuff to like to make it effective. But if you use all this other stuff, you don't actually need the SBT. Or at least, in that sense, like the SBT will be there, but it doesn't, it's not the main driver of why you're using it. It's like, oh, we have the SBT, but we need zero knowledge. Like, we need zero knowledge, and then the SBT becomes useful. Just beforehand, like, just having the SBT itself is, like, not very useful. It's like, once again, you want to put public information on, private information on chain, so it's like, well, you can't really have, the SBT is not really useful until you have, like, zero knowledge proofs. So it's really the zero knowledge proofs that make SBTs even like achievable or useful. And that's just kind of like how I felt about this whole paper. It's like this up, I'm like, you need other people to make, to do a whole bunch of stuff, especially on the cryptography to make SBTs actually sociality and like relationships. But like just get into like some of those use cases, like a lot of them can't really be done with just SBTs. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Uh, I will include a recording of this. Uh, Hopefully this isn't too long. I think I might have, it's probably talked about this for way too long, but it's a big paper. Clear cut, this is a big paper. Hopefully you guys enjoy me ranting. And yeah, that's about it. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you get people come and attend the next Antic Book Club session. I'm gonna try to schedule that for next month on the second Sunday. So yeah, I'll try to do second Sunday of every month, and hopefully you guys find this entertaining, and other people come in and give their findings. Hopefully, it's not as long as this.